The Salvation Army is positioned in 100 countries around the world presently. In this country alone, we're resident in 10,000 communities, either in terms of core community centers, social services facilities, or service units with local volunteer committees. The fact that we're positioned in that way makes it possible for us to respond with immediacy and with a personal investment in the welfare of the people that we're seeking to serve. So when disaster strikes, we want to respond to the pain of people in as immediate and effective and practical way as we can. We have an advantage because we're an international organization which is centrally administered. And so we're able to mobilize resources, competent personnel, in order to come into a situation and respond effectively.
It started out as an average earthquake, and then all of a sudden there was a big jolt from underneath.
You were on the third floor?
Mm-hmm. Yes, which is now the second floor. The third floor was as high as that building right there. All we kept hearing was, "Help me, please help me," all over the apartment complex.
It's been the most complicated disaster America has ever had for various reasons. One, the epicenter was right in an area which was densely populated. What was perhaps not fully understood at that point, that the population were mainly non-American. They were new immigrants. Most of them could not even speak English. They were living in very substandard accommodation. We found that also the economic status of these people were such that they were either border poverty or in the poverty bracket. They had no transportation. They had no families to go to. Canteens were the first thing that went out, yes. The local canteens. Then we realized it was a much bigger operation, and so we called for additional canteens, which came in from, first of all, from Northern California, and then eventually from other parts of the territory as well. After we'd been into the earthquake for 3 or 4 days, we found that the critical need was for just plain drinking water, because there was no water available. There was no electricity, there was no water. People were out of their homes, they were sleeping and living in the parks. And so what could we do? We set up each of the parks, we set up a center at the request of FEMA, and we managed 19 of these parks. Eventually, when rains were about to come, the National Guard set up tent villages, and again we managed those. We also had representatives in the DAC centers, which were the disaster assistance centers, and we were there to help in any area where it was not being covered by some other agency. In addition to that, we set up 5, maybe 6 distribution spots, including the one in Van Nuys on Victory Boulevard, which was our main center. And from there, we sent out, by this time, 19 or 20 canteens, feeding people, providing necessary supplies. We had volunteers, Salvationists and non-Salvationists, working literally around the clock.
Because I love working in the kitchen, so that's where they put me in the kitchen. So I was there from day one to the last day. So if I had $1 for every sandwich I made, I would be living on the interest now, you know. And I didn't want to go home at night. I kept hanging on here till about 7 o'clock at night, and oh God. And then the quake, you know, the aftershocks would come, and I'd be sitting there with the cats, and I'd be terrified, you know, and I thought, is it morning yet that I can come to the Salvation Army? And I was here at 8 o'clock till 7 at night, you know. But now it's getting a bit better now, you know. I'm trying to get my life back together again now.
Anything that you want to add so we can...
Perhaps the best thing that we did was to bring in an assessment team from around the country, particularly the Central Territory, people who had been involved in other disasters, and they were immediately deployed around the whole area. They went out looking around to see what the needs were, how they felt we would be able to meet those needs. These were highly skilled, professional Salvation Army officers and employees who did this. After we'd been going for a while, we realized that there were other parts of the Los Angeles area that had been equally affected and yet hadn't had the notice that Van Nuys or the San Fernando Valley had had. And so it wasn't long before we set up a distribution spot in South Central. Once the centers had been established and people obviously found out where we were because they were coming in droves, but there was a feeling, again, by the assessment teams that we weren't really meeting all of the needs, and we sent out then teams of 2 into the neighborhoods to find out what the needs were. And some of the stories which have come back are virtually unbelievable. I mean, people who were literally sitting down to their last meal, elderly people who didn't even realize there was help available. They had no electricity, so they had no television or anything to watch and see what was going on, and they just didn't know what had happened. They were confused, they were scared. In fact, that program will continue for some time, because even though it's been a few weeks now since the earthquake, there are still some very desperate needs.
Check out what you needed.
Always the first ones on the scene, Salvation Army.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
It was
you
nice
very much.
meeting you.
I think what stands out in our memory for a long time is the sounds of the shaking, and in our inner ear for weeks after we kept hearing this. Every time there was an aftershock, these noises of glass breaking and things rumbling and moving, and it made us a little on edge for a while.
Experiencing again the sounds of it all and the noise of the skirts dragging across the ground as the mobile home shifted over 2 feet, and then as it toppled off of the stands and hit the ground was another boom, and added to that was of course all of the dishes and the cabinets banging and the bookshelves hitting the wall again enough to put dents in the wall and then fall to the floor. So, and to think it all happened in about 10 seconds, it's just an overwhelming amount of noise.
During the immediate response, the best thing we could do was give them small tents, which they would put up in their own backyard or in their front yard. And then we moved into the tent cities and also into high schools, where we kept those people who were homeless. Now we moved into a further phase, which is in operation, and that is called Operation Earth, where we are taking people and placing them in condominiums provided to us by HUD.
Project Earth stands for Earthquake Aid for Relocation and Transitional Housing. A couple of key words there: relocation. We hired a couple of formerly homeless people from our Bell shelter, and we borrowed an ARC truck, and we're actually helping the families move out of their damaged housing and into the condominiums. As far as transitional housing, we're treating the program much the same way that our existing transitional housing programs operate, and that is that there's extensive case management. In Project Earth, the families meet with the case manager at least once a month to plan relocation, and they have 6, 8, 10, 12 months to relocate, and we're helping them to identify permanent housing that they can afford.
Under the circumstances, the Salvation Army seems like they were able to move in and really do things in a very immediate way, and that's what our needs were. Our needs were immediate. And because these properties had been turned over to the Salvation Army, they were able to respond in a very timely manner to meet our needs that way.
It makes us feel like we have a home, and we're very happy about that.
We've had various groups who have wanted to work with us in different aspects. This particular group was interested in helping families, children particularly, and so they arranged with Universal Studios to take them on a day's trip. And so we arranged with the parents of the children who were staying in our shelters. Salvationists, cadets, helped chaperone them. They had a good time themselves, but they took these people out and showed them around Universal Studios and had a great day together. We went through various phases. First the crisis and the crisis intervention, which was immediate, of course, and then the next was the more lasting response. But then we came into the recovery and the long term, and we've got various programs going. But one of them, of course, is Project Earth. The other one is the mobility plan. Our social workers have been working around the clock, interviewing and trying to help people who fall between the cracks. And so the mobility program is when one of our social workers will physically take a family and find a place for them and explain to them and explain to the landlord what it's all about. And they will then, if necessary, get furnishings for that apartment or condominium, and will be with the help of various other people, will be able to get them established.
Our main concern is not only to get them into housing, but to follow up and make sure that that is adequate and that their needs have been met and that we are no longer of service. We always tell our clients that they can always contact us later on if there is a problem. It doesn't necessarily have to be housing. It could be anything else that they need, and we will try and assist them.
There's no question that the Army fits a very unique kind of niche in disaster response, because we bring to it our spiritual motivation, our sensitivity to the spiritual needs of people in disaster and in crisis. We're able to bring the comfort of the gospel of Jesus Christ to people and to be there in the name and the spirit of Christ. And that gives a very special and wonderful dimension to the service that we render.
Well, the Monday and Tuesday I was busy cleaning up glass. I mean, I had buckets and buckets of glass, and then I did that and I organized that, and then that night we had a few heavy aftershocks, and I said, oh my Lord, what am I going to do? So I wakened up on the Wednesday morning and I got dressed at 6 o'clock in the morning. I says, I've got to get down to Salvation Army. I says, I've got to have bodies. I've got to feel a body. I've got to be around bodies. And I knew where to come. I knew down here, because this is my family. This is my home, my second home, actually.